So I'm Joel Hughes, and I run Glass Mountains. We're a WordPress web development company. Been specialising in WordPress for about 7 odd years, and we've got clients in the UK and the US. So we're very much used to remote working. I'll get Steve to introduce himself properly in a moment, but let me give a short introduction. Steve is a very well-seasoned, that sounds like you've been preserved in something, mate.
Every time you write that on any of the promos, I keep thinking of logs.
Okay, so Steve is a well-seasoned web developer who I work with. When did we work together? Was that 2000?
Well, I did lots of work back in 2007. You were there.
Oh, aha. Right, okay. I was going to give him a compliment. No, I will. Steve's an excellent web developer, and I think he's got some great skills in terms of very business-minded and very, very good with clients. So look, I've given you a compliment there.
You have.
Bear that in mind. Right, before we get on with the show, let me quickly chat about the upcoming events. I need to click over to the tab. Yes, so today's event, so we've got an event on the 16th of October. That's the usual WordPressy one. I think I might demo Mailgun and how that integrates with WordPress and the benefits of that. I think I might do that. Yes, I'm not very organized, as you can probably tell. And then on the 13th of November, we've got Sue Keogh back on. You may remember that Sue was on the show in June and gave a fantastic talk about copywriting, and we're going to talk specifically about call to actions. So that'll be great. And on the 27th of November, we got Nick Redding back on the show. And Nick gave a fantastic talk. We had about 30 people watching that back in June. That was fantastic SEO tour de force. And he's going to be focusing on keyword research in November. Both of those talks are available on replay. There's links hanging around somewhere. So if you need to sort of ask about that, that's no problem. I can send you the link. Let's get my notes back. If you've got any questions or any comments about anything we're talking about, please feel free to drop it in, and I can drag them onto the screen like this, I think. Yeah, look, there's a comment from me wearing an equally loud shirt. I think that just disappears after a while. We'll soon see. Right, so before we get on with it, I may have over-egged the title of this show a little bit with the future websites. Steve and I obviously haven't got a crystal ball, and but we will be digging into where the web has come from and to learn a few lessons and to see where we think it's going, really. So I've got a list of topics here I'm going to chat to Steve about, and I also might get onto a little story about a chip shop, which I think I was amusing Steve with yesterday, but I don't know if he was just humouring me.
A little bit both.
Steve, do you want to introduce yourself, mate?
Yes, I'm a seasoned hardwood web developer sold on roadsides across the world. No, I'm a web developer, consultant. I've spent many, many years building websites, improving websites, lots and lots of consultancy in recent days, usually along the lines of how do we sell things better or how do we improve this and that. And generally enjoy going into businesses and telling them what they're doing wrong and what they can do better. So it's quite broad.
I like it. Right. So I thought it'd be a good starting point just to discuss some of the bumps in the road, for a better way of describing it, for how the web has developed. Because, I mean, when did you first start developing or designing websites, Steve?
So I built my first website in 1997 or 98, one of the two. So a long time ago, although about 5 years in my head in that weird way. But
I know. Strange how time works like that. Yeah, I think I got involved in 1999. I was a consultant down in Brighton. I was working on mainframe stuff at the time, but the consultancy needed a website so for whatever reason, they turned to me to help with it, and then I was forever linked to that technology path. Back then, Steve, I don't know if you remember, but websites were built in tables. Does that ring any bells with you?
Yeah, I mean, it was all table layouts and transparent pixels for gaps, and it was that way for a long time. Even as recently as the sort of early noughties, when I was working at Orange, we were still building the main Orange mobile phone website in table layouts, right up to sort of 2005, 2006.
Yeah, it certainly dominated the landscape for a while. Now, for people who are watching this either live or on the replay, who are wondering about what tables are, if they imagine like a spreadsheet with rows and cells, you can imagine that you can drag the width of certain cells and make rows bigger to create a pattern. And that's kind of how we use tables to create a scaffolding pattern and then fill in the blanks with the cells for the design, whether it's a cut up image or whatever. That was the kind of gist of it, Steve, wasn't it?
Yeah, and you ended up into this world of pain where if you wanted to put an image that was the full width of the table, you had to count all the other columns in every other row and, you know, tell it how many columns that had to span for. And, you know, they'd look absolutely fine on your screen, and then you'd find you'd miscounted something in the middle and spend about 2 years doing complex maths out by hand and printing things out and drawing boxes around everything. And it was a world of pain.
It was, wouldn't it? Yeah, I certainly. Now you said that, I certainly remember the whole debugging thing, and I think if we zoom out a little bit, I think the fundamental issue there, which people discovered over time, is that we were trying to bundle up too much, you know, content and presentation into one file, wasn't it? So, what was so how did people try and go about solving that?
I mean, it seemed to take a very long time before people admitted that was a problem. It was that weird sort of decade or so where we just carried on doing that, and then CSS came along seemingly out of nowhere and separated the content from the visual layer of things. And you know, where previously you would, you know, you still put your images in line with the content, but you would actually do all the sort of style in terms of saying how wide something should be, or you know, the spacing between things. You do that in a separate style sheet that was separate to your content.
Yeah, just I think that. Go on, Steve.
It made the world a lot better eventually, around about now, when it's starting to read in and look in the flexible ways it does. There was a lot of years where the browsers, you know, did or didn't support various things, or you know, did things quite differently. I mean, I remember right back as far as Netscape sort of era, and you know, Internet Explorer 4 and 5, and the gradual support coming in over the years in those browsers, but never being the same in any two, which we used to see the problem. I mean, there was a spell before the browsers got their act together where we suddenly realized it doesn't really matter if it looks different in another browser, because the only person who's reloading it in every browser and looking for pixel perfect is the designer or the developer that's building it. So it changed the whole world, really, of web development, I think.
I'm just trying to think of the best way of explaining some of this to people who aren't web designers and developers. That I suppose if you think of it in terms of the web browser is like a glorified file explorer, and then what's happening when we go to a website, it's, you know, when we type in a web page address, it's actually pulling in a load of resources from the web server. And in the new world of CSS, we'd have the content and the HTML, we'd have the CSS, and we'd have images. So all these different files would sort of flow into the web browser, and it would paint it and it would draw the website. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly that. So, you know, without the style sheet being there, you know, your web page may be just the default browser text. So it's your Times New Roman or your Arial font and standardized sizes of heading levels and paragraphs, and you know, all the visual polish we think of on a website these days wasn't there, but the content was there. As it was the you know, the HTML content was there in a structured language, saying this is the most important heading on the page. This is a subheading. This text, and you know, and tables being used for what tables are actually meant for, of data.
and that's exactly the point I was going to come on to. That there's this whole push towards semantic markup, which is exactly as you say, is to use markup correctly. Whereas in the old days, if you wanted to make a heading, you would just maybe make the font bigger. Well, you know, that's just a presentation thing. Whereas in the new world, where we've just got that raw content, we're saying, look, this is a heading, this is a subheading, this is a list. Now, to the uninitiated person who's just looking at the web page, they might not immediately see the benefit there. But the two obvious ones. The obvious one, which always gets quoted, of course, is in terms of accessibility. So that if you've got an issue, some sort of disability, which makes it hard for you to read a web page or even see a web page, that if it's marked up semantically with headings and lists, it can be read out or it can be navigated very, very easily. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, these days we all think of sort of Siri and Alexa as the sort of voice. Alexa in the background now going off, as the voice sort of tools that we have, but things like JAWS, the screen reader, have actually been around. I wouldn't like to guess the year that it first launched. They've been about certainly a good long time before CSS stabilized to the level it is now, and can be used for people with visual impairments or other accessibility needs to navigate around websites in a fantastic way. Although it's very easy for a developer not to know how they work, and for the experience to be very frustrating. You don't have to search on YouTube very long for a demonstration of what goes wrong when when accessibility is not thought about for screen readers.
I think another benefit of that separating content from the presentation is, of course, Google and SEO, who they want to know what our headings are and all that kind of stuff. So it's so interesting to see a lot of the advice nowadays about headings, whatever, that harks back to the days when we had to work hard to separate that presentation from the content. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Because Google ultimately, as clever as their indexing and their AIs have got now at understanding web pages, ultimately they're getting to a stage where they want you to be able to type in a keyword or several keywords into their search tool and match it appropriately to a web page. So if you haven't structured your content in a way that it knows that any particular words on that page are more important than others, then Google's got a pretty hard job other than just counting what's there. And whilst that was how search engines worked many years ago, in the days where you could just stick as many keywords as you like in the same color as the background at the bottom of the page, it's a lot cleverer than that now. And Google's got to a stage actually where their indexing is clever enough to work around a lot of the common problems people have with marking up a web page, but there's still advantages and benefits, both from search engine indexing and for users that aren't looking at it in a visual way or aren't using your standard styles that visually standard people are looking at the screen and seeing. They can still understand the content that's there in front of them. People certainly have their own style sheets that they apply to every website they view to enlarge fonts in some cases, or to take colors that they're blind to away if they've got sort of colorblind issues. So it's really important that the content is marked up in a way in the HTML that makes sense to a machine, essentially.
Yeah. Talking about that makes sense to a machine. This wasn't the next topic, but I think what you just said just sparked it off of me. Have you done much work in terms of Google structured data and things like that?
Do you mean that sort of, you tell them that something's an address and break it down into a granular level and your page and feature you in the index slightly differently, or you tell them what's the product? Yeah. I mean, it used to be called micro formats in a sort of more
schema as well, yeah.
Schema.org, yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you're marking up a website and putting an address in there, if you don't mark that address up and very clearly show what the city and the locality is, and add the extra markup into the HTML that helps a search tool, not just Google necessarily, but to understand the context of that essentially single word you might have there in a paragraph tag or a span, or however you're doing things, then you're missing a trick. There's lots of these different schemas and bits of micro data you can use to pull information out into the Google search results itself. And that's often how you see things like, a little product feature below the first or second organic search results. And it can make a world of difference for often minimal effort beyond sort of understanding the schema and tweaking the markup very slightly. Yeah. And it changes absolutely nothing generally in the front end of the website for visitors that are looking at the text, but it gives Google that sort of heads up that this is our address, or this is a product that's for sale, or this is a review that's been left and these are the number of stars we've been given, or this is the actual positive negative spin on that review.
Yeah, I think it goes very much back to that sort of telling Google what the data is all about, separating the content. I mean, we've done work with things like frequently asked questions or image licensing. And I think the benefit is that, we're taking away the guesswork from Google. I mean, Google will always guess, or Google will always try and validate what you're doing, because I'm sure they're constantly battling people trying to pull the wool over their eyes. But if you're trying to do the right thing and you're trying to structure it up in a way which makes sense to them, then you're doing all that you can, I think, to sort of embed your website data into Google.
It's kind of like if you owned a real world shop and you put something in the window, but you never had the lights on pointing at that item in the window. Why would you go to the effort of having that information on the web page and not do everything you can to promote it where it's relevant? So it's it's an absolute key tool in the arsenal in terms of simple things you can do to just improve that exposure.
Yeah, very much so. And certainly, I mean, I won't get too nerdy for any of the non-technical viewers, but with Google Search Console, which is a very friendly way of seeing how Google, index your website, that's got very clear tools for showing you the structured data on your website. So, like, if we put something in there, they got a structured data testing tool. They've actually got a new one now because I think the old one was superseded. But so you can make sure that you've done your markup correctly, and then you can see that it's working within Google Search Console. So it's not just simply a matter of hit and hope. There are strong tools out there to help with it.
Yeah, and likewise, it's not just Google. I mean, you can look at Facebook. If you've got a blog, for example, or articles that people are likely to share into their social network, there's all the schema check tools and the link tool within Facebook side of things to see that you put the right meta tags in there so that it recognizes it's linked to your page on Facebook, for example, and choose which image is featured, and all sorts of little optimizations you can do that generally don't make any difference to the visual display of the page, but help all these separate indexing systems to represent that page as you want them to be seen.
Yeah, I was just making a note of something there I wanted to chat about. Spun off from what you were talking about. Right, and I would say the next major milestone moving forward then, so we've done the separation for content, we've got CSS, HTML. Of course, then we started embracing mobile, yeah?
Yes, responsive, yeah, absolutely.
Responsive.
Well, to say we went straight to responsive is probably skipping a step where or several where we had terrible websites where there was some sort of text only version of your web page that was barely usable.
Did you ever create a website?
Oh, several. I don't know if anyone ever used any of the ones I created, but they were certainly there.
I was working for an agency, a company up in London, who sold lots of limited edition artwork. So I don't quite know what they thought a website was going to do for them in terms of graphics. But I can remember playing it with the old Nokia with the slide out handset. It was dreadful to work with. Dreadful.
But back in the days of buzzword bingos, where clients heard the word WAP and needed it but didn't really know why. It's
That's the nature of the business, though, isn't it? That there's always some buzzwords coming along.
Yeah, and obviously that's progressed over the years, and the concept of responsive design, where you use a separate style sheet, going back to the CSS that we talked about being separated from the HTML, but you can have a separate batch of CSS, either a separate style sheet file or what they're called media queries, where it says if the screen is smaller than X size, or if a seems to recognize that device, that we load different styles in. So rather than showing a navigation in a horizontal bar or a vertical bar, we can show a little hamburger icon, which has become the sort of norm for a menu for some reason. And tweak things to look good on different display sizes. Again, other steps in the middle between WAP and that, there was the dedicated mobile site that actually wasn't based on the same code base and the same HTML. And even Amazon, up until quite recently, often had totally different content on their mobile site versus their desktop site, and you couldn't do certain tasks because you're on a small screen. Which it's come a long way since there, fortunately.
I think there's probably still a few companies with separate mobile sites, though. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You stumble across them every now and then, or you stumble across the sort of half-hearted attempt at embracing a responsive site where they've just gone with, well, we'll make the logo smaller and hide the navigation and just show two things on the homepage rather than the 20 pages of desktop size content that they normally have. So there's lots of different ways it's been implemented, but the technology, I think, it's just about getting to the point where it's really easy and sensible to have the responsive sites.
Yeah, certainly from a management point of view, you don't want to be having two code bases or two sets of content, or have a content management system having to publish out to multiple places. That must be a nightmare.
Yeah, and it's a very real nightmare as recently as 4 or 5 years ago, really, for a lot of pretty big companies, in fact, that they had to release features separately on their desktop version and their mobile version, and some even had tablet versions in the middle of their separate code base for all of them, and often out of sync, and often
that must have been fun to maintain.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds mad, but it was just the technology wasn't there or wasn't being used appropriately at that point. It's
so I think
quite weird.
Another big thing which came on the back of mobile was we suddenly became obsessed about performance again, because we were obsessed about performance back in the day when we had 56k dial-up modems, the old US robotics. But then as we drifted into nicer connections and focused on tables or whatever, we kind of moved away from that. So can you remember that, Steve?
Yeah, I mean, I would love to sort of share your optimism that we're obsessed with performance again. I think some of the better developers and designers are obsessed with performance, and obviously it really helps that Google have openly said that performance is one of the indicators they look at when ranking websites.
Yeah.
And I think that's actually, and I can't remember again the timings, but that's in the last few years that they've come out and said that they are looking at the page speed as part of their metrics.
A strong signal.
I think that's been where the shift has started going back towards we can't carry on having this 8 meg homepage video loading for everyone, and we can't have these images at 3000 dpi 400 pixels wide kind of thing when they're not needed at anything like that screen size or resolution. So it's a welcome shift as far as I'm concerned, because it doesn't take long being in the countryside somewhere, you're on holiday in the Lake District or somewhere in North Wales, and suddenly you're on a GPRS connection rather than a 3G connection, or even on a 3G connection, and you're trying to load a web page that you're used to loading within a few seconds on your Wi-Fi connection at home, and you're waiting 2 days and hanging off a mountain trying to get that signal.
That's why you need a WAP site, mate. Maybe that technology needs to come back.
Well, there we go. Yeah. That sounds like a winner to me.
Okay, prediction number 1 from Steve is that WAP is coming back. You hit it here first. So, okay, you're less optimistic than me, though. But the importance of performance is. Do you think that's going to carry on being important? Do you think more people and websites are going to pick up on it?
I think a lot of it depends on the audience, and I think a lot of developers and designers and consultants and everybody in this field, from sort of UX design upwards, just assume because they're on a broadband connection that's the norm now. You don't actually have to go that far, even in this country, to find where the sort of average broadband speeds drop from being 30, 40 meg plus to being 1.5 meg on a good day if there's no rain. And it's that insight, I think, that gets a little bit lost. It's very easy when you're permanently on a good connection and loading a website to just go, well, that loaded pretty quick. I wasn't waiting around. And fortunately, we have those tools built into pretty much all the big browsers, directly or through extensions to sort of simulate what would happen on a 2 meg connection or a 500k connection, and to plan accordingly. And we've got tools like progressive images, where a low resolution image downloads first, and then it improves as the connection allows, as the screen paints. And we've got the into HTML and CSS of things like the sort of source set for images to load a smaller version of an image on a smaller device, and lots of the tools to help with that performance thing without necessarily sacrificing the beautiful full resolution site are there in place now. But it's still too often that I notice when browsing that I'm on a web page and it's just taken 10 meg to download just the homepage, and often that homepage is just one big banner image or one big video, and doesn't really serve any purpose other than potentially blocking people out and giving up, because the experience of the people on those slow connections might be they Google for Acme ink and then click through to the website and think it's broken because it hasn't loaded within 5 minutes. It's a big issue, but it's a big issue depending on who your audience is and how carefully you're paying attention to that. I don't think even in this country you can be sure that everyone's going to be on a reasonable broadband connection. I stay in North Wales on occasion in a holiday cottage where, as the owners put it, there's unlimited broadband, but it's very slow and affected by weather. Where sending an SMS message over iMessage is a 2-day task.
Yeah.
these places exist, and potentially they are customers that other than the fact they're living geographically somewhere without a decent BT exchange down the road, are probably just as likely to purchase your services as anyone else.
Yeah.
And the question anyone buying a website these days should be asking is, why would you want to exclude anyone just on those grounds?
Very true. I think an issue which we didn't have a couple of years ago, or at least probably did have a couple of years ago, and is much more prevalent now, is that, and you certainly see it on a mobile phone, or you'll see it on many websites, is that the amount of pop-ups and bits and bobs which appear now, especially for sort of cookies or GDPR, there's a lot of, the user experience sometimes on the phone is just like a disaster. I get a banner at the top to download the app. I might get two banners on the bottom, one for a chat bot, then, and it's sort of, oh my god, what is going on here? And for a company who develops websites, it's not a direction of travel which I really like. I like the direction of travel in terms of we have to be aware of what privacy is, and people need to be aware of what they're giving their permission to. But I just feel the way it's been solved at the moment, or it's not even been solved. I'll get onto that, but it just feels like a disaster zone to me.
The first thing that's interesting to say on that is that although it's kind of gone in two directions, you've got your newspapers, I think are the biggest contenders, or a magazine website where you click through something onto their website, and whatever clickbaity article you found today, and you click through, and then you have to accept the ad preferences. Or if you don't want to accept the ad preferences, you then have to turn off like 35 individual advertising houses, and then you've got to accept that they're going to store cookies, and then they want to know what your location is to tailor the news to you. And it's pop-up after pop-up after pop-up. And in a business like that, I've got a lot of sympathy for anyone that's trying to run a media company these days and provide content for free online when print media is struggling. Advertising revenues are a tiny fraction of what they used to be, and essentially news is available from anywhere you like now. So I understand that they want to partner with all these sort of ad agencies and tailored marketing companies to try and sell you a H&M sweater while you're looking at the Daily Record's website, for example. But the user experience is suffering as a result of that. And then on the flip side of the scale, you've got companies like, I best not name anyone in this context, but you've got big brand companies who aren't actually following the letter of the law yet in terms of these who are giving you the sort of half-hearted, we use cookies, that's okay, or go away kind of banner, rather than we'd like to install these cookies that are required. Can we also install these optional cookies to do things like Google Analytics or any of these third-party data services that actually you can't argue, and the information commissioners have come out and said that is not a required function. Your analytics data might be really useful to you as a business owner, but it's not actually a requirement of your website to have it turned on. So it's kind of a mixed bag. The privacy laws in general, I think, are pretty good. GDPR's brought in and bridged a lot of the gaps in terms of the previous versions of the Data Protection Act kind of predated the internet in a lot of cases, and certainly predated social networks and all these services where now we're all living our lives a lot more in the public. Although thinking it's private. But the side effect of this having to accept 10 things on each website and still not really, for the average user, understanding what's happening underneath all that, it's not really a good user experience.
It feels at the moment it's just reacting to the law, but you're right, there's just no user experience. People don't know what cookies are, they don't know what they're accepting, and they're sure as heck not looking at those privacy policies. They're just gibberish.
No.
To them.
It wasn't that many years ago. I think it was Game, the computer game retailer, who changed their privacy policy at one point to say, by buying from this website, you're consenting to selling your soul to us in return for 2 donuts or something like that, and left that live for a year.
Is that legally binding?
I think it was done to prove a point that I'm not a lawyer. I'm not even going to answer it. But it certainly proved the point that people buy, even on a website where you have to say, I have read the terms and conditions, people just go, scroll to the bottom, tick a box and go ahead. It's,
What is the solution there then, Steve? Is it going to be this future of this muddled response from different websites? or is it going to be something which we build more into the web browser where we set our preferences there, and that indicates to websites? Because I hope we're not in the same situation in a couple of years' time. I mean, I know many businesses are waiting to see who GDPR or CCPA or whoever come down on legally to see, right, we need to take action. But
it's the thing. The Information Commissioner generally is seen as quite toothless in this area and doesn't really do a great deal of prosecutions. I mean, at the very sort of drastic end of the scale, you just got to look at Cambridge Analytica a few years ago when there was all the stories leaking of their abuse of Facebook data, and the GDPR didn't really do anything from the Information Commissioner's point of view. They were waiting weeks for a warrant. Meanwhile, all the evidence disappears off the face of the earth. So until there's a sort of high-level retailer or big website in the sort of household namestakes all over the newspapers or the online news saying they've been fined 10% of their turnover or something drastic as an actual deterrent, people aren't going to take these things drastically seriously. But I actually advocate to my own clients that they should, because at the end of the day, first of all, if you're doing it right, you're not at any risk for being that test case that the ICO comes after. But secondly, if you're doing it right, you end up having these conversations much earlier in the process. Like, do we really need 5 different analytics and heat mapping tools on the website? Can we self-host rather than use Google Analytics and still get enough data that we're actually seeing the measurements we want to see? And it makes you question those tools a little bit. But the bigger picture is that privacy is the next big battle of the web, I think. Well, privacy and accuracy sort of would be the top 2, probably in joint position for me. So in terms of privacy, you've just got to look at TV advertising, and Apple's most recent advertising campaign all over the TV and it'll be on YouTube and on their website, no doubt, is all about how your data is your data, and they're really going big on if you buy an iPhone, your data belongs to you. We don't have access to see it, etc., etc. And then people have to wake up a little bit to see that Facebook is only free because they're making money on the back of what you're giving to Facebook. Google is only free because they're selling advertising on Google, and they have multiple other products that bring them a revenue stream in, again based on targeting you with things. So there's got to be a shift, really, that if people want privacy, which the world at large would suggest they do. People are shocked when they find out their data's being used and they've been marketed based on this or whatever. It's the age-old thing, though. You find somebody on the street and say, "Oh, you realise you bought that jumper because this advert was targeted specifically at you because you bought those trainers," and they go, "Oh, I can see how that might work for other people."
Yeah,
but I made my own choice, and it's a really fine balancing act. We're at a point now where people have got used to things being free. And that's a real problem because technology is not free. It's a lot cheaper than it used to be. But to run a data center that can service millions of user accounts and be providing a product that is allegedly free to the user, there's a disconnect there. So either these services need to go the Apple route of charging a premium product price tag and being willing to factor in, we don't own your data, we're not selling your data, we're not manipulating your data to sell you something else. Or they've got to sort of accept that they've got to be more transparent, which is what the GDPR law was there to do, to say that we're including this script from Google which tracks your usage on this website, but may also inform what's advertised to you on Google in 6 weeks' time. And that's the difficult balance we've got into. We as users have got used to the idea of things being free without questioning why they're free. And
I don't know if you saw on Channel 4 the special report the other day when the Trump's campaign data for voter suppression, and the report was going around to some of the affected areas and showing some of the data that Trump's campaign, and this isn't about Trump, this is about big data and Cambridge Analytica and privacy, and sort of these people were surprised about how people are tracking this data on them, and this is how people like Facebook exist. This is why they make money.
Yeah, absolutely. I haven't seen that Channel 4 news, but I did hear Krishnan and Guru Murphy talking about it on something else briefly earlier in the week, and he was saying that this massive data dump was separated into sort of likely Trump voters, likely Democrat voters, by skin color, by all these different.
Personality.
Yeah, and they run targeted campaigns on Facebook and other social media platforms for people that were unlikely to vote the way that they wanted to from voting. And to encourage the others to vote for their candidate. This is the danger. There was a talk at the New Adventures conference last year, which I think all the talks are on YouTube now, but they had Laura Kalbag talking about the sheer level of data that some sort of data aggregate companies offer, the granularity you can dig down to in your marketing lists and things. And it was horrendous. There was sort of 4,000 or 5,000 metrics that they had on and all these people to segregate them based on. And that data gets passed from one company to the next, and it's all hidden away in these privacy policies that people just accept and carry on because they want their free whatever it is.
Yeah, because I don't, and I think in that sense, it's not a fair exchange at the moment because people don't know it's happening. I think it's all well and good for people to accept it, but people don't know that this data is being tracked and they're being segmented in this way and what that means.
Yeah, and it's not a new thing that legal documents like privacy policies or contracts or terms and conditions are so long that people just sign. It's that's been true for however long. People buy houses with ridiculously long documents and just sign on page 6, 12, and 15, and return it. Then they find out that they're surprised that the driveway water main is their responsibility next door or something. It's
Are you speaking from personal experience there, Steve? Is there's a story there? I think.
Not particularly, I don't think, but it's not a shocking thing that you put a massive document up there that most people don't sit and read it. It's one of those things, but it's this new way of exploiting people's data and the sheer amount of data that people now share sort of without really thinking about it. They're just posting the picture of their kids on their Facebook wall, or they're just writing about where they've just been 10 minutes ago on Foursquare, if that still exists even, or any of these other services, with no regard whatsoever for what that data might get used for in the future, or until someone comes up with the use of that data. Sometimes it's not even a scary prospect. I mean, does it? I remember years ago, Joel, on Facebook, you used to always check into the everywhere pretty much on Foursquare. So, on a Friday night, if I looked at my Facebook, I'd say, "Oh, Joel's gone for a curry," or "Joel's gone to Spa."
Yeah, well, you did like to keep your tabs on me, mate.
But that data in itself is amusing and harmless. But if somebody then wants to use that data, for something that we've not even thought of, something malicious, it's all there, and it's not owned by you anymore. I think that's the real danger of the web. But I think it's tied at the moment. I think there's almost an equal weight to the privacy concern of what happens in the future in terms of data ownership and what it's used for. But also coupled with it's so easy to publish false information now, and that again is not a new problem. For a long time, people had articles in newspapers and said things that weren't true, and the correction goes in the back page 2 weeks later or 2 years later or whatever.
Very small, yeah.
People had GeoCities websites where they would write something outrageous on there, like Star Wars is better than Star Trek, or vice versa, and it doesn't really matter because it's on a GeoCities page that gets 200 views in the entire life of that website being there, and most of them are for the guy looking at his hit counter and wondering if it's going up or not. It's the big difference we have now is someone can publish something this afternoon saying that Joel Hughes is a lizard in a Hawaiian shirt, and if it gets shared enough times on LinkedIn or Facebook, it's seen, and some people will believe that, and it's out there. And starting to see the examples of this being a real problem with things that are actual life and death issues in some cases. The mistruths about the pandemic or vaccines, or anything from this underground network that's stealing children to pipe out vaccines for celebrities to stay young or something. It's and this stuff is going around the internet at a rate of knots on the social networks and things, and we don't at the moment have any safety guard in place to highlight to the people that are vulnerable to this sort of stuff, who maybe don't have the the critical thinking skills themselves to go and source a legitimate news source, or to know what a legitimate news source is, to double check these things. And I think that's the real danger of our times, is that people are giving up information too easily, but then other people are realizing that this misinformation can be spread without really any consequences.
I think I tweeted the other day that, and again, this is Trump's campaign, but this isn't only linked to Trump. That one of his advertising campaigns was pulled off Facebook because it was like misleading, but it had already been viewed by something like 250,000 people or something huge like that. So, well, the damage has been done. It's again, that's the analogy there is like the retraction which goes on the back page in the small print. It's sort of the genie's at the bottle there.
These aren't new problems. It's not unusual for either reasons of malicious intent or just genuine error that the newspaper runs with a story that turns out to be completely wrong, and someone's reputation is damaged, or some company's reputation is damaged, or they end up getting sued for whatever reason. The problem now is the speed with which that information can be replicated and shared around and appear to be genuine. I'm lucky that I kind of have a cynical mind about a lot of these things anyway. So if my Auntie Joyce shares something on Facebook suggesting that it's been proven that Boris Johnson's some sort of alien from Mars, I'm probably not going to take it all that seriously. And I'm going to an extreme of ridiculousness here, just to don't want anyone to believe it that's watching this. But until we have some sort of method or organization to sort of, I don't even know what the solution is, to flag things as being trustworthy, which, there are these sites now cropping up, your fact check sites, and the service on Facebook now where they'll mark a post as being, this is disproven or such like. But as you say, the damage is done. People see the initial headline and share it, and it goes around the world. And the internet is empowering that at the moment, and social media particularly. And the regulations haven't caught up, and the companies themselves, for whatever reason, I mean, the obvious one being that their business model is based on having content, whether it's real content or not.
Eyeballs, money,
yeah, they're not self-regulating because they don't have to, and something has to change in that sense, or the whole the internet itself sort of starts to crumble in terms of being a useful resource for anyone.
Well, I hope we're not going to end on that glum note, mate. Do you think we should end? Maybe we should end with that, like a happy song. Would you like to do that?
I'm waiting to hear about your chips.
I'm going to save the chips. I'm going to save the chips because we're on 45 minutes now, and I think I'll do that separately. Steve, that was fantastic. I was really very interesting points there, and I'd love to get you back on to talk about a specific topic in the future. That was fascinating stuff. Is there anything you'd like to say to our? Oh, we got one visitor now. It's gone down. That's what happens when it drags on. But as I say, the replay will get millions. I promise you.
Well, I'll look forward to those millions, and I'll be there in the comments.
All right. Well, Steve, thanks very much for coming on. For the sake of the replay, etc., don't forget we've got a couple of other events coming up. Go to glassmountains.co.uk/webinars just to see what's coming up. And there we go. Well, what time is it now? Yeah, 1:45. I think we'll end there. Everyone have a lovely weekend. So it's goodbye from him.
It's goodbye from him.
Thank you, Steve. Well done, mate. Okay, let's finish that broadcast.